Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to deal with the Charter for Religious Rights and Freedoms in South Africa. This document was drafted by a team of religious leaders. We spoke to Professor Pieter Coertzen of Stellenbosch University and conducted the interview in a beautiful church called the Moederkerk in Stellenbosch.
The South African Charter of Religious Rights and Freedoms is the first public charter to be developed under Section 234 of the Constitution of South Africa. The Constitution states that in order to deepen the culture of democracy established by the Constitution, Parliament may adopt charters of rights consistent with the provisions of the Constitution. The South African Council for Religious Rights and Freedoms outlines what the legal and civil manifestations of the right to freedom of religions are for individuals, groups and official organizations within a South African context. The right to freedom of religion is guaranteed in the South African Constitution and its Bill of Rights without qualification. The first instance is found in the affirmation of religious belief contained in the concluding words of the preamble to the Constitution. May God protect our people. God bless South Africa. Section 9, the Equality Clause, prohibits unfair discrimination on various grounds, including religion. Section 15 explicitly allows for the right to freedom of religion, religious observance in state and state-aided institutions, and also creates the possibility for the recognition of religious legal systems and marriages that are not inconsistent with the Constitution. Section 31 protects the right of persons belonging to a religious community to practice their religion together with other members of that community and form voluntary religious associations.
Professor Pieter Coertzen, thank you for inviting us to this wonderful historic church, the Moederkerk here in Stellenbosch in the Western Cape, to talk about the South African Charter of Religious Rights and Freedom. Now, I'm sure you're aware in the media that there's been a number of challenges against religious freedom. A number of churches been investigated by the Human Rights Commission. And this charter now becomes a very, very important document. And I wanted to talk to you about that. How did it start? How did this charter come about?
Errol, I was the so-called church law advisor of the Dutch Reformed Church in 1994. And also in 96 when the new constitution came into existence. And Article 15 of the Constitution declared that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. And that posed a new challenge to the churches to know what does that freedom of religion mean? And so I started organizing conferences, academic conferences here at the Theological Faculty on church and state relations, religions and state, and gradually it went over to the question of freedom of religion. What does that mean? It was quite a few of these academic conferences that we organized. And then at one of the conferences the idea came up, but why don't we formulate something which tells us what does freedom of religion mean?
Okay, because in the Constitution it's guaranteed freedom of religion.
Yeah.
However, it doesn't explain what that freedom of religion means.
No, it doesn't, except that Article 9, which is on equality, says in 9.3 that there may be no discrimination against anybody on grounds of their religion. Article 31 says that people are allowed to come together to practice their religion. So it's very sparsely said in the rest of the Charter, but it is there. But the question remains, if we say freedom of religion, what is the content of that? What does that mean? And what is the ambit of this freedom of religion?
So the South African Charter of Religious Rights and Freedom answers that.
That's what we try and do, yes. And let me immediately say, it is still not yet a completely finalized document. People all the time come up and ask us, but what about this, what about that? And then we realize we must talk about that and see perhaps something must be added, perhaps something must be put in another way. But I think the essence of what freedom of religion is contained in that document.
Now, like I said, this has become an important document because of the challenges that's happened. So who all of the religious community in South Africa were involved in compiling this document?
At first, we were a small committee of people from the Dutch Reformed Church, from the Gereformeerde Kerke, the so-called Doppers, from the African traditional religions, from the Muslim community, from charismatic churches in South Africa. And we got together as a small committee, we heard the ideas discussed in the conference, and we started formulating that document. We also had advisors in the person of Professor Ian Benson and Professor Rassie Malherbe, and also lately Mr. Vic van Vieren.
And these are all law professors?
No, some of them are law professors. Vic van Vieren comes out of the labor organizations. He plays a very strong role in the United Nations Labor Relations Committee. And there were theologians, there were lawyers, there were legal scholars, there were leaders from churches that all got involved. And so finally we brought a document to one of the conferences, and they said, okay, now we can go ahead with this. So we circulated that first draft very widely to as many religions and church denominations as we could in South Africa.
And what has been the response to it so far?
It was positive. We got some questions. We paid serious attention to all the questions that we got, and eventually we knew now the time is right, that we can organize an occasion where this charter can be publicly endorsed.
Okay, so let me clarify. It started with a number of religious groupings. There's a lot of Christians that was involved with it, but this is not essentially just for the Christian religion.
No.
You're saying that we need religious protection for all religions, not just the Christian. But at the moment, currently, there's been a lot of challenges against the Christian church. So this would work for the Christian church, but protect other religions as well.
As well, and that is very important. It is for all the religions in South Africa, and they were all involved in the drafting of this document. We must understand that this Charter of Religious Rights and Freedoms is not something like a confession of faith, which is particular to a certain church or to a certain grouping. This is more of a, let's say, a religious legal statement that we make, to say that as citizens of South Africa, as religious citizens, those are the rights that we think we can claim and stand on in terms of Article 15 of the Constitution.
Okay, so just to clarify then, this is not a theological debate. This is about, it's a principle really, and what it says in a nutshell is that government does not have a right to interfere in the autonomy of religions.
Yes, and of churches. It is, I think the terms law and religion describes this document very well. It's about the religions, and it is about their legal position in South Africa. And we consulted very widely in drawing up that document. We circulated the first drafts to international scholars. We got their comments. We consulted various declarations of the United Nations and of Africa, and eventually we came up with that document.
I'm sure that you've seen in the media the reports on Joshua Generation Church, for example, being investigated by the South African Human Rights Commission, and Kriari Training Center in Bloemfontein, and a few others. Are you concerned about that?
Yes, I am concerned. It's always dangerous when the church or a religion comes into conflict with the state, because in the end you have to find a balance of rights. What are the rights of the churches and the religious organizations in South Africa, which they can legally claim in terms of the Constitution? And on the other hand, what are the rights of the state and of the community out there And these often come into conflict or into debates with one another. And what we are trying to do with this charter is to say, but we have certain rights as believing people on which we can stand. And that will still take a lot of debate between the religions and the society and the government of South Africa.
One of the most important things I've seen, on the first page of this document is a comment by former constitutional judge Albie Sachs in 1990. And he said the following: ideally, in South Africa, all religious organizations and persons concerned with the study of religion would get together and draft a charter of religious rights and responsibilities. It would be up to the participants themselves to define what they consider to be their fundamental rights. And this is exactly what you've done.
It's absolutely right what Judge Sachs said there. And the amazing thing is that we've only became aware of that quotation after we had drafted the Charter of Rights. Absolutely. And that gives me a lot of hope for the position of religions vis-à-vis the Constitutional Court of South Africa. If they realize what Judge Sachs wrote there, and I'm sure they do, we have a ground to stand on and to talk to them and talk to the people of South Africa.
I want to refer to clause 9.1 in this charter. And I think this is where the crux of the matter is at the moment, because the Human Rights Commission has challenged Kriari Training Center and said to them their belief that homosexuality is contrary to the divine will is what they take issue with. But the Bible says that, and that's what their belief system is. They're not teaching discrimination or harm, but they believe what the Bible is, and they're teaching what the Bible says. Also, Joshua Generation Church, similar thing, where they're teaching spare the rod, spoil the child, loving discipline in the home, and the Human Rights Commission saying we don't agree with that. You're teaching violation of children, torture, abuse, and this is where the disagreement is. It's a biblical understanding and teaching, and the Human Rights Commission's view based on United Nations documents. And what clause 9.1 says in the Charter is that every religious institution has the right to determine its own confessions, doctrines, and ordinances, to decide for itself in all matters regarding its doctrines and ordinances, and in accordance with the principles of tolerance, fairness, openness, and accountability, to regulate its own internal affairs, including organizational structures and procedures, the ordination, conditions of service, discipline, and dismissal of office bearers and members of the appointed, conditions of employment and dismissal of employees and volunteers, and membership requirements. So it covers just about everything there. Now that, I think, this is the issue, because freedom of religion doesn't say all of this. It just says you have freedom of religion. But this flesh, it gives it flesh, it gives it substance. And I think this is what we need to get enshrined in law to back up the constitutional protections of religious freedom. Now the next question then is, how do we do that?
Errol, can I just make a small remark to about what you've just said? It is indeed so that religions and denominations have the right to determine their own confessions, their own doctrinal standards, etc., and their own order. If we read Article 9 of the Constitution, which says there must be no unfair discrimination.
That's right.
And if just what you've read there in Article 9 of the Charter also says that the procedures and the doings of the different religions must be fair, and there were other words that you used there. And that is very important. A religion must be able to show demonstrably that what we are doing here is not an unfair discrimination towards a member of our congregation or our religion. They must be able to show on the grounds of their religious documents, their confessions, their church order, that there we say this is our fundamental belief that we have. And they must be able to show with which rights they come into conflict in the Constitution. And then, very importantly, they must be able to show why do they differ from those rights which are spelled out in the Constitution. That is very important. And that means that there must be discussion between the organizations in society, the Human Rights Committee, and this Charter of Religious Rights, to see that we can try and balance the rights of people. We can't deny that people have different views in society, but we must grant each other the room, the space in which we can live together in South Africa. That space where people can be free to practice their religions and their convictions. And I think the churches and the religions, on the other hand, although they do not agree with much which is going on in society, they must recognize that those things are there, and we must live with it, and we must act in a Christian attitude towards those people with whom we completely disagree.
That's right.
And I think in that way, this charter can help South Africa and religions and churches in South Africa to work together for the common good of the country.
Yeah, and if we come to conflicts between state and religion, like the one with Joshua Generation, for example, where the state has a view on what constitutes child abuse. Christians are teaching spare the rod, spoil the child, which is a reasonable chastisement without abuse, in love, commanded by Scripture to do that. So there's two views. So how do we reconcile those two views in law? Do you think the Charter will help do that?
I think the Charter can help us to do that. It can help the courts, when they render a judgment on a case like that, to take into account what the position of the churches are. I must say I'm often rather troubled at the moment in that there are groups in society who are pushing certain so-called human rights and who want to force churches and religions to comply with their principles that they see. And I think that from both sides, from the sides of religions and churches, as well as from the side of people who have another point of view on this, there must be discussion, and we must see whether we can find that balance of rights which is necessary in our country. I can just say that, very interesting, in 2005, when the Human Rights Commission made an inquiry into the so-called exclusionary policies of voluntary associations, and that would include churches and religions too, voluntary associations. And the Human Rights Committee brought out a report which said there is a possible way that you can solve these problems. And I think we as religions and churches must take note of that document and the suggestions that they make on how we can solve certain problems.
And avoid conflict, obviously.
And avoid conflict, yes. Because, I mean, this stuff has a tremendous possibility of creating conflict in South Africa. And we don't want that.
Absolutely. Dr. Isaac Berger of the Apostolic Faith Mission of South Africa, he made a statement and he said that he would try to avoid conflict with state and state organs. But when it comes down to his beliefs and his biblical standards, if he has to be forced to make a choice between obeying government or obeying God, he's going to obey God. I think that's where most Christians stand, and I think that's where most religious people in South Africa stand. And so it is an area of conflict that we need to solve and look at. And I think this charter, and a number of lawyers that looked at it at a meeting we had in Pretoria said that this is a brilliant document. It was well thought out, it's well put together, and we need to get this enshrined into law to back up the Bill of Rights that protects our religious freedom. So the next question then is, Professor Coertzen, is how do we get this thing enshrined in law?
Well, I told you how we got the charter on paper and how it was endorsed. And just by the way, the deputy president of the Constitutional Court, Justice Dikgang Moseneke, he gave the keynote address at that. And that tells us something about the attitude from the legal side.
But towards this document?
Towards this document, yes. And how we get it into law. After 2010, we went into a round of discussions with bodies in civil society, trade unions, academic bodies, and we told them about this, and they all responded very positively. And then, earlier on in this year, in April, we started with a round of discussions with political parties. And we met all the political parties in Parliament, except two.
Can you remember who that was?
Yes, it was Azanian People's Organization, and another one was a small party. I think they had only one representative in Parliament, and he forgot about our meeting, and we will still go and see. I'm sorry that we couldn't speak to the Azanian People's Organization.
But what I'm trying to establish is that all the major parties,
Yes,
at least,
yes.
ANC,
Yeah.
DA,
DP,
COPE,
yeah.
ACDP, everybody.
Freedom Front, all of them, we had discussions with them.
And what was their response to this document?
Well, they appreciated this document. That's what we got in the meetings with the representatives of those parties, and they all gave us some very good advice on what they think would be a way to bring the document before Parliament. And we are going to pursue that now. It was mentioned more than once that the Interfaith Commission of Parliament would be a good vehicle to organize a discussion on the Charter, and that perhaps from there it can be taken forward. Now, in that part of our endeavor, we are going to need the demonstrable support of churches and religions to show that this document is not the document of a few academics. It's a document that comes out of the religious community in South Africa.
I think that's what would give it significance and integrity, in that all of the religions in South Africa back it and support it. It's not one denomination or church group, and I think Parliament will then obviously look upon that favorably.
Yes.
So we have to get this document into Parliament, get it tabled, get a discussion, and then the way forward then depend on what happens in Parliament.
What happens in Parliament, yes. Even if Parliament says, no, we don't think the time is right for a document like that, there is still another way, and that is for churches and religions, in the meantime, to accept this document as part of their official documentation. Okay. And once they've got that, they've taken a decision and say, we accept this Charter of Religious Rights and Freedoms. If a case comes before the court has to take that in recognition as part of the official documentation of that church.
That's very interesting what you say there, Professor, because there's a number of churches that are being challenged by activists wanting to become members, even though there's a clash of belief systems and understandings on moral issues. Now, what you're saying is, if those churches adopted this document and made it part of their founding documents, that they would then have a strong argument. They could submit it to court and say, look, we cannot accept people on the basis because this is our belief system. This is we've laid out the criteria for membership in our church. So that's something I never thought of, but which can be done in the meantime.
No, because you know what happens if churches don't have a document like that, and they have no position on, say, labor issues. What then happens is, if the church is brought before court, and the court asks them, okay, what is your position on this? And they say, no, well, we don't have an official position. The court reverts to the laws of the land. That's right. And they judge that issue in terms of the laws of the land. And it was on that many a church and the religion have lost their cases in court.
Yeah, I think a similar case happened with the Methodist Church recently, where an ex-minister got married, a lesbian minister got married, and the church fired her. And she took that case to court, but they kicked it out because there wasn't anything in the church's documents that dealt with that issue. So that makes sense. So, Professor Coertzen, we want to thank you so much for talking to us and explaining this very vital, which is becoming a very vital document in South Africa now, the South African Charter of Religious Rights and Freedoms. We're going to look forward to the next step, which is getting this to Parliament and enshrined in law so that churches can be protected. But we want to thank you for all the work you've done, along with all your colleagues. Thank you again for inviting us into this beautiful church, and we want to talk to you as the thing progresses. We'll keep speaking to you about the progress of the document and what happens in the future. Thank you.
And can I just say that should anybody want a copy of this document, they can just email me and I will forward it to them so that they can see what the content is.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll put your email
and
address
my
at the bottom of the screen, and so people out there can contact Professor Pieter Coertzen and request the South African Charter of Religious Rights and Freedoms. He'll send that to you.
And it's available in 6 of our official languages,
I've seen
as
that.
well as in German. So, and I hope that God will guide us on our way to bring this before Parliament, because we think it's for the good of South Africa.
One of the most important points Professor Coertzen made was that we don't have to wait for this charter to be enshrined in law. Churches can adopt this into their constitution to protect themselves from the kind of attacks we've seen with Joshua Generation Church and with Kriari Training Center. Next up, we speak to Andre Becker of New Living Way Ministries. He's embarked on a campaign to demand rights for former homosexuals. Andre Becker, thank you for talking to us at Watchman on the Wall. We're standing here in front of Parliament, the National Assembly building in the background, and we're talking about human rights and the protection of the rights of all people in South Africa. Now, you have a ministry called New Living Way Ministry, and that essentially is helping people with unwanted same-sex attractions. You started this ministry because you lived as a homosexual for 32 years of your life, believing that you were born this way. And in an encounter with God, your life was transformed. You're now married, and you have this ministry to help others. Andre, can you give me an example of discrimination that you have suffered as a person that have left the homosexual lifestyle?
Yes, sure. There's on several levels that we find discrimination. I think first of all is the fact that we are not acknowledged and known as former homosexuals, the fact that we will be not included in any of policy making or anything that is involved with former homosexuals, where especially orientation is of importance. So not even in the government we have a say as to the policies or anything that's made, which is outright discrimination. It can never be fair towards the whole community as such. And not standing with us against the gay activists who is trying to deny us those rights that is equal to what they are fighting for.
Absolutely.
And they themselves are, for many years, were the victims, and now they are the victimizers.
They're the victimizers. That's a very important point.
But they will literally, that's their strategy, is to silence us. If anyone comes out of homosexuality, they will literally go after him and literally harass him so much and bring hate speech against him and threaten him so that he will go back into the closet, and for that reason then they can say there is no former homosexuals. I myself have experienced at first hand how they would mobilize the gay community so that they will flood your emails, your SMS.
So it's harassment, bullying, intimidation.
Absolutely so.
And amazingly, these are all the things that the homosexual activists are complaining about. They would say, you know, people hate speech, people are intimidating us, not giving us our freedoms, not respecting us. And they're fighting for all these rights, but they're doing exactly the same thing to you. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in the gay rights movement.
Absolutely so.
So Andre, this cause you have taken upon yourself to get rights and recognitions for people that have left the homosexual lifestyle. Is this a personal cause, or are you doing it on behalf of all people that have left the homosexual lifestyle?
It is a cause that's for all people. We find that it's not just in South Africa we battle with this matter, it's worldwide that we battle. And therefore I say we represent everyone that is a former homosexual that has no recognition throughout the world. It's not only South Africa.
Now let me ask you this. We often see in the media homosexual activist groups demanding this right or that right. Do you think that government haven't given you the recognition or the rights that former homosexuals deserve because of pressure from homosexual groups?
There is no doubt that there's pressure from the homosexual groups, and it's mainly because of their own agenda and the fact that they proclaim and say, even against all scientific proof or scientific information, that a person is born that way, you cannot change. which science says it's possible to change, and even we as former homosexuals are examples of people that change. The complaint I also lodged with the Human Rights Commission is the fact that we are not equally recognized and seen with the rest of the minority groups, and then in that process all the other rights are jeopardized. I mean, whenever we would say anything about our beliefs, about how we see it, because it's true that most former homosexuals comes from a religious background. So whenever we bring religion in, whenever we bring our own views in, it is all seen as we are busy hating these people or telling others to hate them, and that is never that. We say that we are not against the one that wants to go and live his lifestyle, but we do have to have the opportunity for those who that can honestly say, I live with unwanted same-sex attraction, I want to change, and we need to give them that opportunity. They have the right to decide for their own lives.
So do you think that just your very existence, the fact that you've actually come out of the lifestyle successfully, that you're married today, and that you have a ministry to help others, that you are a threat to the arguments homosexual activists are making, that you're born that way and you cannot change?
That is for sure a threat to them. We see it over and over that the first line of attack is your personality, that you suppress it, that you never change, that it is just a fake. There's a whole lot of these things that they will always just bring forward. Then they would also say that the fact that a person has unwanted same-sex attraction is the fact that the religion is bringing them under condemnation, and therefore they feel bad about what they are and how they feel. So the very existence that a person can change is a threat to them.
Now, we've seen a recent case in the United States of America. The New Jersey governor, Chris Christie, has banned organizations that want to help people come out of homosexuality. So in other words, people that counsel homosexuals and help them walk this process. He's actually said it's illegal to do that. What do you think about that?
If you look at the law, the child that thinks that is transgendered, he can make a decision and he may give his opinion about it. But a person that feels like, I'm not born that way, so it's okay to change your gender, but it's not okay to change your orientation. And that is stuff that is really very, very discriminatory, which we say that you have to give that child the right to decide, just as the transgender has the right to have an input. Even the gay person that says that I feel like I'm gay, but the guy that says, you know what, I feel like I'm not, this is not my identity, I need to change. Or even the one that is molested when he was a child, he hasn't got the right to deal with those emotions. The only thing they do allow is to have affirmative therapy, which means you have to accept who you are, while this person never thinks that's who he is. So I think that is just very, very, very against the human rights of those people. And we say that we are a minority group just like them. We battle with the same issues like them, and we are coming out of homosexuality, and that is not acknowledged, because the difference is that we say that we do not identify with any of the GLBTI identities that they put out there, and we say no, we are former homosexuals, which means that we do not identify with any of that. We are not born that way. Our bodies tells us who we are, and that we can't just live according to our feelings and our thoughts about what we feel, but we have to take our bodies as the guideline as to who we are. So that is why we say that we need, as a minority group, the same recognition, the same respect, the same laws counting for us that's going for the GLBTI community.
And what was the response of the Human Rights Commission?
First of all, I wrote an open letter which I sent to United Nations office, which I also sent to Judge Cameron, to Bishop Desmond Tutu, and also Vijay Pillai. And there was no response to that, so I also sent a letter to the Human Rights Commission, the same open letter, and then we laid a formal complaint.
And what was that? If you can just explain, what was that complaint you laid with the Human Rights Commission?
The complaint was that we are not recognized as a minority group, and that they discriminate against us, not acknowledging our rights, and not seeing that we get the same respect and the same recognition as the minority
So
groups.
you're saying that people that have left the homosexual lifestyles voluntarily, their existence is almost being denied in South Africa. Is that what you're saying?
That's 100% true. That is our whole battle. Even the gay community is literally ostracizing us.
So what has been the response from the Human Rights Commission? Have they sent you a letter?
The first letter was where they said to me that I should lay an official complaint, which I did, and which is then directed to the United Nations Human Rights Office, and then people, Cameron, Tutu, and Vijay Pillay, and they just said they sent it back to me and said they will assess it to see if they've got the mandate to investigate it, or they will then tell me to which other department it will be referred to if they need to refer it.
So you've written to Bishop Tutu, you've written to the Human Rights Commission, you've written to the United Nations, and any responses from anybody yet?
No responses except the letter from the Human Rights Commission.
That they're looking into this matter. And we want to keep our viewers updated with the progress of that, because I think what you're doing here is very important. I don't think anybody has challenged government or the Human Rights Commission or Bishop Tutu, as a matter of fact, and saying, look, you're always calling for the protections of homosexuals and the homosexual community and the rights of these people, but there's nothing said about people like you. And here you standing, you're a reality. I personally know so many former homosexuals, people that by the power of God has changed and transformed their lives, and there's this blanket, this hypocrisy in this nation from government and the media saying you don't exist, and that is to underpin the arguments that homosexual activists are making, that we're born this way and we can't change, yet there's so many people that have successfully changed. So Andre, we want to support you, give you our full support. You doing this not for yourself, you're doing this for thousands of people out there that are being silenced. And they're being silenced by the media, the liberal secular media. They're being silenced by government, who will not give recognition and rights to people like you. And so we support you, and we want you to keep on the fight. I think you're opening up something in this nation that hasn't been opened up yet. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Errol, and thank you for the opportunity. We do appreciate it.
Please pray for Andre Becker as he fights for justice for a lot of people that has not even been recognized in our country. Next up, we speak to a number of Christian leaders in Cape Town, and we ask them their opinion on both of these issues, which is very important at this moment: religious freedom and the rights of former homosexuals. This is what they said. Mandla, there is a challenge from a group in South Africa and overseas, former homosexuals that come out of the homosexual life. They believe that they are not being recognized and given the freedom and due diligence that they deserve as former homosexuals because of pressure from homosexual activist groups. What do you think should happen in South Africa to remedy that?
Well, the thing is, there are always two sides to a coin. There are always two sides to a story. And I think the trouble has been is that often focus is put only on one side of a story, and the other side, either for convenience purposes or anything else, isn't really looked at. And so my pledge is that, or my hope at least, is that we would look at both sides of the story, is that if enough of us can make a little bit of noise just to say that there are people out there who have a story that isn't being listened to, that needs to be listened to, that we could do that. Because if it is true that we all stand for freedom, and I expect that we all do, then we really should be looking at the freedoms of people, even if they are in the minority, because often there is a minor voice that has right standing in in what we stand for as a nation, what we stand for in our freedoms.
Now, former homosexuals, when you said we, would you think should be helping them to get the recognition and the rights they deserve?
Well, I think that there's a multi-pronged approach to that. Of course, I believe in the power of the family. So I believe that the family should rise up, individual families. The church in general represents the family. And what the government is here to do as well is to protect the rights of the family, of the individual. So I think that not only should the government come in, but families and churches representing families should also rise up and just stand for what is right.
Ryan, the Joshua Generation Church has been investigated by the South African Human Rights Commission for essentially teaching a biblical principle. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's a much bigger issue than just this investigation. I think for us as a church, we're waking up and saying, wow, something's happening in South Africa. There's definitely a move afoot. There's definitely an agenda. And so for us, on one hand, it's been great because it's caused us to wake up. It's caused us to say, hey, what can we do about this? What is this actually going to mean in the future? On the other hand, obviously, it is very disturbing because we have enjoyed a huge amount of freedom up until now, even as pastors preaching, even as lay people speaking to one another. We've enjoyed freedom and we would love to continue that.
Ashley, you head up prayer movements in South Africa, here in Cape Town especially, and we've seen the attacks on religious freedom appear to be growing in this country. I know you're concerned about it, everybody else is. What do you think the church should be doing to combat this thing or to address it?
Well, first of all, Errol, I am concerned on the one hand, but also excited on the other hand. You know, through history, the enemy, the arch enemy, has been attacking the church, but so often God overruled and turned things around. And I am looking forward to something happening even through this that will unite the church, that the church can stand together to protect religious freedom, to protect freedom of expression. These are human rights things. And we trust that everybody else in South Africa will buy in, Muslims and Jews and Hindus and everybody, because all of us, we want freedom of religion. We want freedom of expression. We want freedom to say what we want to say. We want freedom to say what the Bible says, and we want to free to proclaim it, to pray the good news that Jesus loves everybody.
That's right. Tiny, we've been talking about what is happening in South Africa with Joshua Generation Church, Kriari Center. Are you concerned about the freedom of the church in South Africa?
Well, the issue that's been raised, I'm at Christian Life Camps Bay, the issue that's been raised is the question of the abuse of people. And I want to say that from a biblical point of view, we are totally against the abuse of children or people in any way, for we know that we should regard anybody better than ourselves. But freedom of religion has got different aspects to different people, and for a law to be imposed upon what I can and cannot teach from the Bible deals with the question of interpretation. And I believe that my stand on the biblical points of view on how to train children should be the standard for the nation, not just for a particular group.
But what if the South African Human Rights Commission and our government disagrees with what the Bible is teaching and say to the church, okay, there's certain things we don't agree with, and therefore we're instructing you that you cannot teach that? What would your response be to that?
My response would be that the words of Jesus command us to love one another more than ourselves, and that would be my standard, not what other people say. My standard is what Jesus said.
Baruch, do you believe people that have come out of the homosexual lifestyle deserve recognition and rights in South Africa?
Well, you know, thinking about that, there was a a YouTube that I saw a number of years ago by an Italian, and I think his name's Sergio or something, and it's called Gino Era Gay. He entered a song contest, a huge thing in Europe, which was tried to be boycotted and changed the laws by the gay community because of this statement that he was making. It's a beautiful YouTube to see.
What does Gino Era Gay mean?
Oh, Gino Era Gay means Gino was gay. So that was the name of the song. And afterwards, even when I was telling people about it, because it's a beautiful, you must see it, okay? Afterwards, the gay groups and people put terrible things onto YouTube for people who were searching for that. You would pick up some very, very nasty stuff. And so from the gay community, there is a huge resistance against recognizing that a person who was gay, or that a gay can change and now say that he's not and be free from that lifestyle. And so I really believe that they do need to be recognized by society and protected, that there is such a thing, that the Constitution, just as it is now protecting gay people, whether that's correct in natural law or not, but because they exist, of course they need to be protected. Well, then so for those who have chosen not to follow that lifestyle anymore, because you can even take it in another direction. If I wanted to follow a certain religion or ideology, and at some point I decide that this is wrong, I change to another, and I change, then of course I've got to be able to go from one ideology, one way of thinking to another way of thinking. It's the same with religion. We preach a faith because we believe it's true, and if someone's grown up thinking that something else was true, and he hears or he reads or he finds out or his heart dictates to him that it's more true to walk in another way, and he's able to change, this must be recognized.
And you should have the right to do that.
Absolutely.
And not be demonized.
No, not be demonized, because then someone has the right to go from straight to gay. Just as someone's got the right to go from gay to straight, or from Krishna to Judaism. This must be an open right to people if we're talking about human rights.
So, John, the attacks on religious freedom is increasing in South Africa. So Joshua Generation Church, Kriari Training Center, all these issues have been in the media. There is a charter of religious rights and freedoms that have been developed, and this thing would almost explain what religious freedoms mean in South Africa. And so there's a big push to get this thing enshrined in law, or for churches to adopt it. What is your thinking?
Well, I think that the first thing is that every leader in the country, in fact of any religion, regardless if he's from an Islamic background or a Hindu background or from a Christian background, should really look at this charter, because it really affects all of us. Anybody with religion in this country who believes in some religious belief, they need to see this charter. And if they can see this charter, they can read it. If they believe that it's right, then they should adopt it in their local context, and also even try and push it forward to their leaders as well to get this thing put into law. And so I think it is incumbent upon anyone with a religious background in this country to look at it, take cognizance of it, and let's look at this and see if this could be a great solution to us just making sure that we have that freedom. This is a land of freedom. Let's make sure it's free.
Yeah. Do you think the challenges on churches for their beliefs, you think it's a result of the lack of understanding of what religious freedom means? Because it hasn't been fleshed out. There's no explanation of what that means. Do you think that's the reason for what is happening in the country currently?
I think the lack of clarity about religious freedom is very important. There is no clarity. I mean, freedom is a word, and you can take freedom in all sorts of directions. So if this charter helps us to really say, well, this is what religious freedom is, then it really helps everybody. It helps the state, it helps the religions to actually know what is right, what is wrong, where we fall, what we can stand up for and what we can't. So I really do believe that this is something we should look at, and I would encourage every leader to do so.
That's our show for tonight. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us. If any of you need a copy of the Charter for Religious Rights and Freedoms, please email Professor Coertzen at the email on your screen. If you have any comments or suggestions for the show, please email me at info@familypolicyinstitute.com. You can also go to our website, www.familypolicyinstitute.com, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can join us on Facebook and Twitter. The details is at the bottom of the homepage. Thank you for joining us. God bless you, and remember to keep on standing.